Hibernus, and it mentions punishments for laughing. So I'll just quote directly from it. He who smiles in the service, meaning this kind of service that we just had, 6 strokes. If he breaks out in the noise of laughter, a special fast, unless it has happened pardonably. So they took humor very seriously, but they took it very negatively, actually. Humor is a bad thing in spiritual life. Partly because they believed that humor expresses, it's a certain sense of superiority, like having, that, or arrogance, which is a sign of ego, which needs to be crushed in spiritual life. That's the idea. But they never asked, maybe that's the wrong theory of humor. So this superiority theory, it's very mainstream. A lot of people believe it, but it doesn't seem that plausible because there's a lot of humor and a lot of laughter that has nothing to do with expressing your superiority over other people. It's kind of obvious. Okay, so there are other theories also on the market, and I'll just mention 2 of the other Western theories of humor. The second one is called the relief theory of humor. Here the idea is that when we laugh at a joke or laugh together, we're relieving ourselves of excess energy. And so we feel this sense of relief. And that's what gives us happiness from laughing. And there are quite a few philosophers who believe this. Herbert Spencer, John Dewey. But the most famous advocate of this relief theory of humor, can anyone guess? Sigmund Freud. He wrote an entire book on jokes called Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious, published in 1905. And his idea is, of course, many of you know this at least about Freud, is that unconscious plays an outsized role in our lives. And our superego is constantly telling us to repress what's happening at the level of the unconscious, which is the seed of things like lust, anger, greed, racial hostility, and many other things, all the bad things, And so we spend our waking moments trying to suppress that what's coming up from the unconscious. When we hear a joke, we laugh because all that energy we spend in trying to repress our unconscious desires, our unconscious fears, unconscious anxieties, that energy gets released. And so we feel happy for some time. That's the idea. And he says it's not a coincidence that so many jokes are either sexual in nature or racist. Like laughing at the expense of another racial group or some kind of minority. That's because it's those feelings of lust, feelings of racism, all those are at the level of the unconscious that get released through jokes. Then there's a third kind of theory of humor called the incongruity theory. This was defended by philosophers like Kant, Schopenhauer, and Kierkegaard. And here the idea is that we laugh at a joke, we laugh at something, when we see something incongruous. We expect one thing and we get the opposite. So in fact, in a lot of modern stand-up comedy, it has the jokes that they tell has that kind of structure. There's a setup, and then the punchline is something that you're not expecting, and then you laugh as a result. It's very common if you just look at like late night monologues, Stephen Colbert or something like that. That's like a kind of classic. I'll give you one corny joke. I'm warning you that it's not a sophisticated joke, but I enjoy it nonetheless. A pair of cows were talking in the field. One says, "Have you heard about the mad cow disease that's going around?" "Yeah," the other cow says. "Makes me glad I'm a penguin." It's kind of funny, right? As long as you get it. Maybe some people, there are some quizzical looks. Maybe you didn't get the joke. Makes me glad I'm a penguin. What's the joke here? Yes! That second cow has mad cow disease, so he thinks it's a penguin. So it is funny. I'm glad that you guys are laughing.
Somebody gets it.
Yeah, there we go. So that's an example of this incongruity theory. You're not nobody's expecting when two cows are talking to each other about the mad cow disease that one of them has mad cow. But the moment he says, "It makes me glad I'm a penguin," that's the unexpected moment, right? And then you laugh as a result. All right. So now we have these three dominant Western theories of humor in the background. One is what was the first one?
Superiority.
Now I'm forgetting. Superiority theory. Second is the relief theory. Third is the incongruity theory. Okay? Now we can get to Sri Ramakrishna. And what's so unique about his use of humor? and his connection between humor and spiritual life. It's so unique. I personally feel, and of course I invite all of you to think about it for yourselves, that none of these dominant Western paradigms of humor can really explain Sri Ramakrishna's use of humor. I think we have to come up with a new paradigm of humor in order to appreciate what's so unique about Sri Ramakrishna's use of humor. In fact, I was tempted, but then I resisted the temptation to call this talk Jokes and Their Relation to the Superconscious, as a play on Freud. But most of you, I don't know how many of you actually are aware of this book by Sigmund Freud about jokes. Jokes and the relation to the unconscious. So it would have fallen flat probably. But in any case, for Sri Ramakrishna, humor is always connected to and grounded in the spiritual, the divine. That's what's so unique about Sri Ramakrishna. And I want to go in a little bit more detail and try to link it directly with some of these Western paradigms and show how he's really moving beyond these three paradigms. But before I do, I want to make two disclaimers. First of all, anyone who's read the gospel, you know that on almost every page there are jokes, there's laughter, and so I don't pretend to be comprehensive. Second disclaimer, as all of you know, humor, a lot is lost in translation. Because every word matters, the pacing matters, the rhythm of the sentence matters. So the great stand-up comics like Dave Chappelle, and if you talk to them about how they craft a joke, they spend hours agonizing over a single word because each word matters. Now, Sri Ramakrishna joked in which language? Bengali. And if you don't know Bengali, a lot of the humor is lost. That's just a fact which you have to accept. Fortunately, there's still some humor there, even after the translation. But sometimes I'll be mentioning the original Bengali as well. But if you don't know Bengali, I'm afraid that a lot of the humor actually will go over your head. But the first thing I want to mention about how Sri Ramakrishna relates to these three Western paradigms, I think one thing he's doing is he's turning Freud on his head. Okay. So I think that when we laugh at jokes, we're not expressing our unconscious desires. For Sri Ramakrishna, when we laugh, we're expressing our deeper divine nature, our deeper spiritual nature. Why? Because Vedanta defines the divine as rasa. That's the term used in Sanskrit. Raso Vaisaha. That's a mantra from the Taittiriya Upanishad. Raso Vaisaha. God himself, or God herself, is rasa. God is joy. God is humor. God is bliss. God is ananda. Ananda is another very expressive term in Sanskrit. In fact, the divine reality is defined as Satchit Ananda. Many of you know that. Ananda. Rasa is a kind of synonym for ananda here. So when we laugh, we're expressing our innate ananda, which flows from our divine nature. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. So Freud is always kind of debunking and bringing things down to this bring things down to the gutter in a way. And Sri Ramakrishna is saying, no, humor is not based on the gutter. It's actually coming from the heavens. You see, we're expressing our own divine joy, which is deeply embedded in our nature. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna himself explains why he laughs and jokes so much. He says, this is from the gospel, he says, the Divine Mother has kept me in the state of a bhakta, meaning a devotee, a vigyani. That's a special kind of devotee who sees God in everything. Then he says, that is why I joke with Rakhal and the others. Had I been in the condition of a jnani, I could not do that. Jnani is just somebody who's always saying, I am that Brahman, I am that Brahman. In this state of vijnana, I realize that it is the mother alone who has become everything. Sees God in everything and everyone. I see her everywhere. In the Kali temple, I found that the mother herself had become everything, even the wicked. So if you see everything as God, how can you help but you cannot but laugh. You cannot but be constantly in bliss and joy. That was Sri Ramakrishna's standpoint. Okay. Now, for the remainder of the talk, I want to start to sort of discuss and to some extent analyze some of Sri Ramakrishna's jokes and his humor. Of course, we know that we murder to dissect, and so we want to be careful not to overanalyze these jokes. Otherwise, we'll suck the fun out of the jokes. But I want to mention in particular 4 of the main ways that Sri Ramakrishna uses humor in a spiritual way. Okay. The first one is, remember the first Western theory of humor was the superiority theory. We can see Sri Ramakrishna sometimes as using humor, but flipping the superiority theory on its head. Like he flips Freud on his head by emphasizing the superconscious and the divine rather than the unconscious. In some of his jokes, he's flipping the superiority theory on its head. How does he do it? Because instead of laughing at the expense of other people, feeling that we're superior to other people, what he does through these jokes is to make fun of ourselves. That's what self-deprecating humor means, right? So I want to give you an example of self-deprecating humor. But before I get to that, I want to mention why this is so important. This has come to the fore, especially post-pandemic. But it was a problem even before the pandemic. Depression is a huge issue now throughout the world, especially in the most affluent countries, the US, for instance. And we're past the COVID pandemic. Of course, now it's sort of coming back, but it's not nearly as bad as it was in the past. But this pandemic of mental health, this pandemic of a mental health crisis, and especially depression and anxiety, is growing. It's a massive problem. That's part of the reason why some people turn to spiritual life. So what spiritual lessons can we learn from Sri Ramakrishna to help us handle mental health issues like depression? One thing that I think Sri Ramakrishna is saying is one of the roots of depression, one of the possible roots of depression is taking yourself too seriously. Taking yourself too seriously. Don't take yourself so seriously. This is an important spiritual lesson. You'll find often people who are the most negative and the most depressed tend to take themselves way too seriously. And if they could just get out of their heads and kind of poke fun at themselves. And these people tend to be very sensitive too. So if you just like kind of joke with them or something, they might take it personally. They might become overly sensitive, get offended very easily. So Sri Ramakrishna is encouraging people not to take themselves so seriously. And he sets the example himself by poking fun at himself. So I want to start with this because I think it's a really, first of all, because it's a funny joke. Not exactly a joke, but it's a unique use of humor. But also because it shows his own humility. So this is taken from the Gospel, December 6th, 1884. Sri Ramakrishna didn't know English, but because he was living in British-ruled India in the 19th century, and a lot of the people who came to him were Western educated, so they would use English words sometimes. So he knew a handful of English words. One of them was damn, D-A-M-N. And so he uses this to his advantage in this context. Okay, but the context is really interesting. He's talking about very, very high spiritual philosophy. He's talking about the inseparability of Krishna and Radha, his consort Radha. And making this very profound philosophical point that Brahman and Shakti are inseparable, and all these are very high teachings. Then, the dialogue. As Sri Ramakrishna finished these words, these very lofty philosophical teachings, Bunkim was a famous writer, Bunkim, and his friends. Bunkim and his friends began to whisper in English. And English was a mark of that you're very sophisticated and learned, right? Bunkim and his friends began to whisper in English just after Sri Ramakrishna was talking. Sri Ramakrishna, smiling to Bunkim and others. Well, gentlemen, what are you talking about in English? Because he doesn't know English. Adhar, another devotee of his. We are discussing what you have just said, your explanation of Krishna's form. Sri Ramakrishna, smiling. That reminds me of a funny story. It makes me want to laugh. Once a barber, Napit, was shaving a gentleman. The gentleman was cut slightly by the razor. At once he cried out, damn! But the barber didn't know the meaning of the word. He put his razor and other shaving articles aside, tucked up his shirt sleeves, it was winter, and said, you said damn to me. Now you must tell me its meaning. The gentleman said, don't be silly, go on with your shaving. The word doesn't mean anything in particular, but shave a little bit more carefully. But the barber wouldn't let him off so easily. He said, if damn means something good, then I am a dam, my father is a dam, and all my ancestors are dams. All laugh. But if it means something bad, then you are a dam, your father is a dam, and all your ancestors are a dam. All laugh. They are not only dams, but damn, damn, damn to damn, damn. That is a really funny joke. And then everybody in the room bursts into loud laughter. But if we look at this a little bit more deeply, we'll find that what he's doing is making fun of himself. He doesn't know English, so he's putting himself in the position of the barber, who doesn't know the word damn. So you see how we can learn from Sri Ramakrishna how to make fun of ourselves, how to tease ourselves, how to poke fun of ourselves, not to take ourselves so seriously. And that is a great antidote to various kinds of mental health issues. It's one of the things that really helps. But of course, in Bengali, it's even funnier. But so learn Bangla. It's one of the incentives to learn Bengali, so you can appreciate Sri Ramakrishna's jokes. Another way that he uses, this again is in the context of flipping the superiority theory on its head, right? But it's not just about self-deprecation, it's about how he uses jokes. Sometimes he'll use a joke to point out weaknesses, flaws, deficiencies, things that are holding people back from a spiritual standpoint, but in a very gentle, lighthearted way. So he'll say a joke in front of somebody to bring that person's attention to some weakness or deficiency in them, but in a way that doesn't sting, you see. So let me give you a couple examples of this. One example, the great Keshav Chandra Sen, one of the great householder disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, is a world-famous preacher. He went to England. He was invited to England. He met Queen Victoria. I mean, he was a big deal at the time. He was the leader of a particular Brahma Samaj sect. And Sri Ramakrishna tells a story about when Keshav visited him one day. Sri Ramakrishna says, one day Keshav came here with his followers. Keshav had a lot of followers. They stayed till 10 at night. We were all seated in the Panchavati. Pratap, who was one of these followers of Keshav, Pratap and several others said they would like to spend the night here. Keshav said, no, I must go. I have some work to do. I laughed and said, so this is Sri Ramakrishna, I laughed and said, can't you sleep without the smell of your fish basket? So then he tells the story. Once a fisherwoman, Michuni, was a guest in the house of a gardener who raised flowers. She came there with her empty basket after selling fish in the market and was asked to sleep in a room where flowers were kept. But because of the fragrance of the flowers, she couldn't get to sleep for a long time. Her hostess saw her condition and said, hello, why are you tossing from side to side so restlessly? The fishwife said, I don't know, friend. Perhaps the smell of the flowers has been disturbing my sleep. Can you give me my fish basket? Perhaps that will put me to sleep. The basket was brought to her. She sprinkled water on it and set it near her nose. Then she fell sound asleep and snored all night. শেষে আঁশচুপড়ি আনাতে জল ছিটে নাকের কাছে ভোঁ ভোঁ করে ঘুমোতে লাগলো ভোঁস ভোঁস করে ঘুমোতে লাগলো. So there's this word onomatopoeia, you know the word? Words that sound like what they, like meow, moo. So in Bengali, snoring, we say like, like that, but Bengali, bhosh bhosh. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna used here. At this story, the followers of Keshav burst into loud laughter. It's a very funny story. Sri Ramakrishna was a master storyteller, so he's really good at painting a scene, with the fisherwoman, with the fish basket, and a room surrounded by flowers. And every word he thought about carefully. But by doing so, notice, the joke is very subtle, actually. Of course, he's poking fun at Keshav, because he says, I have to go back to my family. So he can't handle the smell of flowers for too long. He needs to go back to his fish basket, right? Okay, at the same time, when his followers laugh, that laugh becomes uncomfortable. Why? Even when we laugh, we're laughing at the fisherwoman in a way. Ha ha. So funny, she can't live in a room full of flowers, which are so wonderful. When we start laughing, we realize after some time that all of us are in the position of the fisherwoman, actually, to a greater or lesser extent. That's the deeper thrust of the joke, actually. He's not just making fun of Keshav and saying that he himself is so great. Every single one of us is that fisherwoman to a greater or lesser extent. That's the deeper point to take away. Every single one of us. None of us can live in a room full of flowers 24 hours a day. That's why we're spiritual aspirants. That's why we have different worldly desires and attachments, and that we haven't yet attained illumination, right? And we should be honest with ourselves about that. And when he says it with a joke, it loses that, it doesn't have that sting, but we can still kind of internalize that point, and we can try to learn from it. That's the idea. Another example of this, Judu Mollik was a very wealthy householder disciple of Sri Ramakrishna's. And this is an incident involving him from December 18th, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna actually visits Judu Mollik's house. And the description is that Judu was surrounded by his admirers, well-dressed dandies. This is directly taken from the gospel. And Judu welcomes the master, and then Sri Ramakrishna with a smile. Why do you keep so many clowns and flatterers with you? In front of his clowns and flatterers, he's asking this. Bhar Moshahib. Why do you keep so many Bhar Moshahib? Judu smiling, that you may liberate them. Laughter. So Judu's funny too. Okay, then Sri Ramakrishna says, flatterers think that the rich man will loosen his purse strings for them, but it is very difficult to get anything from him. Once a jackal saw a bullock, like a bull, and would not give up his company. So imagine a jackal following a bull. The bullock roamed about, and the jackal followed him. The jackal thought, there hang the bullock's testicles. Pretty good. Sometime or other, they will drop to the ground, and I shall eat them. When the bullock slept on the ground, the jackal lay down too. And when the bullock moved about, the jackal followed him. Many days passed in this way, but the bullock's testicles still clung to his body. The jackal went away disappointed. All laugh. That also happens to flatterers. So this is really funny. And the joke, see how wide-ranging, how kind of all-encompassing the joke is, because of course he's poking fun at Judu for surrounding himself with these flatterers, which is a sign of ego. But he's poking fun of the flatterers themselves in front of the flatterers, who are like the jackals, questioning their motives and asking them, you know why you're really sort of hanging around with him all day, because you want to get some of his money, partake of his wealth. Let me see. There's so many examples. I can't tell you all of them. Another use. So the first use of humor, as I said, is to flip the superiority theory on its head and to encourage us to make fun of ourselves, laugh at ourselves, not take ourselves so seriously, so that we can make spiritual progress, so that we have a more positive attitude. But the second use of humor that I've seen, when you look at the different kinds of jokes he tells, is that he uses humor sometimes to teach very lofty philosophical and spiritual ideas. That's also true. And I want to give you a couple examples of that. One of them is the following. The big question is, what is God and what is God's nature? It's a huge philosophical and theological can of worms, and people have been debating these questions for centuries, millennia. And this is taken from the gospel. Smiling, Sri Ramakrishna says, I have practiced all the disciplines. I accept all paths. I respect the Shaktas, the Vaishnavas, and also the Vedantins. Therefore, people of all sects come here, and every one of them thinks that I belong to his school. A man had a tub of dye. Such was its wonderful property that people could dye their clothes any color they wanted by merely dipping them in it. So you have to imagine the picture. And he says this on several occasions. This is a shortened version of it. But You have to imagine this person with this magical tub of dye. And person one will come up, and this guy with the dye says, "What color do you want your shirt dyed in?" And they say yellow. Dips it in this, there's only one tub. Dips it, comes out yellow. Next person comes. "What color do you want it in?" "Red." He dips in the same tub of dye, but it comes out red. Next person, "Blue." It comes out blue. Now the fourth person comes along and is astonished by this. How can the same tub of dye be producing all these different colors, right? So it's in that context. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, "A clever man said to the owner of the tub, 'Dye my cloth the color of your dye stuff.'" All laugh. It's very clever, actually. This one person recognizes that this tub of dye is this kind of universal color. It has all colors. And he doesn't want his t-shirt to just be in one color. He wants it in all the colors. So likewise, Sri Ramakrishna is likening that person to himself, actually. Sri Ramakrishna realized God as Kali, but was not satisfied. Then he prayed to Divine Mother, to Kali, and said, "Now show me yourself, reveal yourself to me in many different forms." And he used to call himself a glutton in the spiritual field. It means you eat one thing, you're not satisfied. Even if you're almost full. No, but I need to eat another dish and another dish and another dish, this kind of cuisine, that kind of cuisine. In the same way, he said, no, now I want to worship God in the way that Vaishnavas worship him. Let me realize God as Krishna. Let me worship God as Christ and realize God as Christ. Allah. He practiced Islam, Christianity, and he practiced Advaita Vedanta. He realized his own true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. His appetite for God was insatiable. So he was like that person who asked for the t-shirt to be dyed in that universal tub dye color, right? So that's a very lofty spiritual teaching, but he expresses it through humor, you see. Another example, he says, this is from October 1st, 1884. He says, a person reads a little of the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavata, or Advaita Vedanta, and thinks he has understood everything. Once an ant went to a hill of sugar. One grain of sugar filled its stomach, and it was returning home with another grain in its mouth. On the way, it said to itself, next time I go, I shall bring home the whole hill. All laugh. So here, again, he's making a very profound point, but through humor. Like this ant, we're nobodies. And we think that we can know the whole of God and pontificate about God and argue and fight and sometimes kill other people in the name of God, saying you don't accept the real God, the true God, our God, and therefore you must be wrong. Sometimes you must be hurt, you must be destroyed. He says, who are you to think in this way? God is infinite. He says there's no limit to God. God is with form, God is without form, and much more besides. That much more besides is very important. No matter how broad your understanding of God, you can never know the whole of God. Nobody can. And you don't need to. He says, in order to touch the Ganga, which is a sacred river in India, one of the sacred rivers in India, he says, do you have to touch the whole Ganga starting from where its source in Gomukh and then run your finger all the way down to South India where it flows into the Pacific? No, that's nonsense. Touch it at any point, you're touching the Ganga. He says, likewise, realize God in any form, and you realize God. Why even pretend that you can realize the whole of God? That's the idea. Another example. This is an example where he's trying to explain the mystery of the incarnation, how God can incarnate as a human being. And he says, it is hard to recognize an incarnation of God unless the mind is completely free from lust and greed, worldliness in general. A person asked a seller of eggplants the value of a diamond. So this person takes this invaluable diamond, takes it to an eggplant seller. How much is this? How much will you give me for it? And the eggplant seller says, I can give you 9 ounces of eggplants in exchange and not one more. Because he only knows eggplants. He doesn't know the value of a diamond. So when God comes in human form, the vast majority of people, most of us are like these eggplant sellers. You see, we don't have the ability, the purity, the holiness, to appreciate holiness in other people, actually, and to see the divinity in other people. And again, he explains that very high idea, but through humor and jokes. Another thing he was really good at was wordplay. And this is, as you can imagine, completely lost in translation. But he would often play on people's names. And so one great Pandit that he had met is named Vidyasagar. Any Bengali will know the name. Even today, Bengalis, when they learn Sanskrit, they often use his textbook, Vidyasagar's textbook, explaining Sanskrit, teaching Sanskrit. So he meets Vidyasagar for the first time, and Sri Ramakrishna says, today at last I've come to I have to give you the back of the meaning. His name Vidyasagar means, Sagar means ocean and Vidya means knowledge. So literally his name means ocean of knowledge. Okay, that's the context. And Sri Ramakrishna is punning on the name. He says, today at last I've come to the ocean. Up till now I've seen only canals, marshes, or a river at the most. But today I'm face to face with the Sagar, the ocean. All laugh. Vidyasagar, smiling. Then please take home some salt water. Laughter. Sri Ramakrishna was also he was very witty, and so he was a master at repartee. He would always have a comeback. So then he said, oh no, why salt water? You aren't the ocean of ignorance. You are the ocean of vidya, knowledge, Vidyasagar. You are the ocean of condensed milk. So this is really untranslatable. So that's why you're like, Westerners who don't know Bengali. You're an ocean of condensed, that doesn't sound. What is that? No. Nago nona jol keno. Tumi to avidya sagar no. Tumi je vidya sagar. Shokoler hasho. Tumi kheer samudro. Shokoler hasho. Kheer samudro. Okay, but let me try to explain it. See, of course, Vidyasagar means ocean of knowledge. Vidyasagar, of course, oceans are salt water, right? So he's making that joke. Being humble. I'm nothing but salt water, even if I'm an ocean. And Shram says, no, why should you be salt water? You are Kheer Samudra, which means an ocean of Kheer. And Kheer here has a double meaning. On the one hand, there's a deep spiritual meaning. Because Kheer Sagar, this ocean of Kheer, of something like condensed milk, is actually the eternal abode of God, of Vishnu. In the Puranas, you'll find the eternal heaven of Vishnu, where he lives, where Vishnu lives. And so he's saying that on the one hand. At the same time, Bengalis know that kheer is a kind of sweet, made of condensed milk, right? And so he's playing on the double meaning of this word and then reminding Vidyasagar of his divine nature. Instead of having this false humility, recognize that there's divinity within you. And because one of the things that's distinctive about, I don't know how much you guys know about Vidyasagar, but he was well known in Kolkata for being very, very kind and compassionate and had a great service mentality. He would always help other people. And Sri Ramakrishna knew that. That's why he came to visit him, actually. And so he recognized that divine within him. That's what he was encouraging Vidyasagar to recognize in himself, actually. Because at the same time, Vidyasagar was not, he didn't really believe in God. And so Sri Ramakrishna felt that if I could just give him a little bit of a spiritual push and recognize that God is within him, he's dwelling within him, then he can put him on he'll help him make spiritual progress. Another use of jokes. This is, I've talked about, so 3 different ways, right? So the third way is he's doing a lot of wordplay. The fourth way, he'll sometimes use humor to bring people together. Because he was full of love. And during the 19th century, there were many, Brahmo Samaj was a hugely popular Hindu reform movement. And it was splintering into different sects. Keshav Shen was the leader of one of the sects. And Bijoy Krishna Goswami and Shivnath Shastri were the leaders of a different sect called the Shadharan Brahmo Samaj, to which Vivekananda belonged. He was actually not a follower of Keshav. Some Western scholars think that Swami Vivekananda was a follower of Keshav, but he was a follower actually of this different sect of Brahmo Samaj before he met Sri Ramakrishna. That's a separate thing. But in any case, there's these different sects. And they don't like each other. You know how sects are in general. And Sri Ramakrishna knew that. But they all love Sri Ramakrishna. So Keshav would come to see him. Vijay Krishna Goswami would come to see him. And on one occasion, they're both there together. And Sri Ramakrishna could sense the tension. So he's trying to cut the tension. So how does he do so? This is from February 2nd, this is October 27th, 1882. Sri Ramakrishna tells Keshav, look here, there's Bijoy, meaning the leader of a competing sect of the Brahmo Samaj. There's Bijoy. Your quarrel seems like the fight between Shiva and Rama. Shiva was Rama's guru. Though they fought with each other, yet they soon came to terms. But the grimaces of the ghosts, the follower of Shiva, so you have to keep in mind, this is, any Hindu in India will know this, but the followers of Shiva are ghosts. And the followers of Rama are monkeys. Hanuman is a leader of the monkeys. Okay. So he says, but the grimaces of the ghosts, the followers of Shiva, and the gibberish of the monkeys, the followers of Rama, would not come to an end. Loud laughter. Now see, the point here is very interesting, and it's very true actually. Leaders of sects, leaders of any large movements, they tend to be generally more large-hearted than their followers. And it's usually the followers that turn the teachings of their leader into something more sectarian, narrower, and the followers of these different sects fight with each other, commit violence. You see this in almost every religious tradition. And the leaders tend to be, the founders, the leaders tend to be much more broad-hearted and generous. But again, he's making this joke, this very profound point, but using humor, and then also as a way of cutting the tension and bringing these devotees together, basically, you know, because he could sense that tension between them. Okay, so that's it. I could talk a lot more, but I wanted to wrap it up here. And so I want to just emphasize the two takeaway points here about humor. The first thing is, don't have the wrong idea that in order to be spiritual, you have to be humorless and serious all the time. And in fact, Swami Medhanandaji used to say, religion is not for dyspeptics. So if you always walk around as if you have a stomach ache and you're always serious, you're not being really spiritual. You should be full of joy. When I was in, as Jeff mentioned, I was in India for 13 years as a novitiate when I was training as a monk. And I was in Biluman, which is the global headquarters of our order. And I would go for a jog in the morning. And I would almost daily walk past a monk who's since left his body. He's no longer with us. But anytime he'd see me, every single morning, he would greet me by saying in Bangla, Anande achuto. It's even hard to translate that exactly because it has a special kind of feeling to it in Bengali. It means roughly, are you?
Is that, are you happy?
Are you joyful?
Are you joyful? Maybe it's better. Happy is not quite right. It means something like, I hope you're joyful, right? Like that kind of thing. I hope you're joyful. That's the only thing you would ask. Nothing else about how am I or anything like that. And that's very important in spiritual life. And if you feel that your joy is lessening or that you're becoming more serious, it means there's something wrong with your spiritual life. You should reevaluate what you're doing and ask yourself, well, why am I not getting joy from my spiritual practice, from my spiritual life? Spirituality should not be like pulling teeth. And another thing, this is related, but one of the real takeaways, especially if you read Sri Ramakrishna's teachings regularly, and I really feel that we should, especially for followers of our tradition, just if you spend even 5 to 10 minutes at night and read the gospel, it'll just bring joy to your life. It's a real antidote to things like depression and other mental health issues. And anything, you might have quarreled with your spouse, or your kids, or your coworker, but when you read even a little bit of the gospel, it just kind of, puts things in perspective, and you can kind of laugh at yourself and your problem, and these little petty problems. We all think we're like that. We're so big in the world, but we're all these ants, actually. So try not to take yourself so seriously. That's one of the big takeaways, I think, from this talk, I hope. And yeah, make a regular habit of reading the gospel. That's another suggestion I have. Right, thank you.
Are there any questions for Maharaj? This is now the question and answer part of any topic.
Or comments, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did we end up getting the live stream to work or not?
I did.
Okay.
I actually had to start a new one though.
Okay.
And I put a message out. We had a few people.
Okay, good.
But it'll be recorded and we'll send it out.
Okay.
So if you want to send it to people. Any questions?
I think that's the reason reading gospel is so interesting. It's not boring. Because
No, it's the
always-
opposite of boring. Yeah,
Yeah, it is not boring.
and it's not serious.
I read,
It's not always serious. Yeah.
I was on vacation and I took the book and I read a lot, whole day.
Mm.
And now again I'm reading from the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
I've read it so many times I've lost count. I read every single day, and except when I'm traveling, for instance, when it's a little more difficult. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It really, and it's a really unique spiritual document. Actually, there's nothing really like it, because you don't just get his teachings. You see how he lives and behaves on a moment-to-moment basis, on a day-to-day basis, and it's extraordinary.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Swami Vivekananda was. So I've heard of him making some comments, some jokes here and there, but nothing like Sri Ramakrishna. Is there anything with him?
Oh, he had a great sense of humor.
And mind you, because I know
Yeah.
he did. Well, I don't know, but I know of a couple of instances where, for example, I think maybe it was in Chicago, maybe it wasn't, where the father, he was playing with a bunch of kids, and the father told him that he should act more serious
Right.
because he was good. And Swamiji said something like, "We're all children of immortal bliss," or something.
Yeah.
like that.
No.
And
No,
so-
it was very funny.
Okay, and
Yeah.
so he was. So he,
Oh yeah, he was
well.
fully in that mold actually. Yeah. The only the difference is we don't have the equivalent of the gospel of Swami Vivekananda in that way, where we actually see his day-to-day life in that way. You know, we get little glimpses from reminiscences of some people who met him, but it's not nearly as comprehensive as what we get. I mean, see, Sri Ramakrishna, because he was God, he sort of beforehand arranged for every person in his divine Leela to play a certain role. So he appointed to M. Mohanlal Gupta to take notes after every meeting that he had and to write this book, you know. And Swami Vivekananda, he had somebody like that, Goodwin, to transcribe his lectures. But the lectures are different from his day-to-day life and behavior. You know, what was he doing when he was off the podium? You see, if you just see me doing this, that's one thing. But what do I do afterward? You know, that's
okay.
so. I think that's partly just an asymmetry in the amount of information we have about them. But the little glimpses we get is that Swamiji was full of humor and joy and bliss, actually.
And one of the reasons that I ask is because oftentimes I hear about him being so blunt that it catches. I'm going to say Westerners, maybe more than just Westerners, off guard. And some of the stuff that I've heard about, I would read it or hear someone talk about it, and then think about it and think, well, you know what? I think he makes a lot of sense when when he would do or say some of the.
There was a reason for it, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you really think about it,
Yeah.
You're right. There was a reason for it.
Yeah.
But at the time, some of the people, maybe a little bit later on, if not immediately, they would understand, or then they would,
Yeah.
maybe it wouldn't. If they did hurt, it wouldn't hurt them as much later on.
No,
But
yeah.
They would learn something from it. There would
That's
be a
right.
lesson in it.
And of course we should, so Swami Vivekananda had many facets to his personality. He had a very, very humorous, joyful side. He had a kind of a harsh side, blunt side, as you say, an intensely fierce side. But so did Sri Ramakrishna. And in the same gospel where he's making jokes left and right, there are certain places where he can be really, really harsh and blunt. One time he turns to his beloved M, the author of the gospel, and says, "Shame on you." He says, even after having one or two children, you're still engaging in this, carnal behavior with the wife. Aren't you ashamed? Behaving like an animal? Just really cutting language in front of everybody. And M sits there ashamed like that. So he could be as ferocious, more ferocious than Swamiji, and more blunt, But so that's a sign of a great teacher, actually, a spiritual teacher. Knowing what that person needs at that particular moment, what will help them, what will benefit them most spiritually. Yeah, spiritual life is not always a walk in the park. He's not always making jokes. That's important to keep in mind. Half the time he's in samadhi, the other half he's joking. Sometimes he's also scolding. That's important.
Directions in the conversation you want to take this? What would you guys like to talk about?
I want to ask you, I like to read Bengali book. Is that San Diego Center has Bengali Ramakrishna book?
Kotamrita. Which book are you talking?
San Diego.
San Diego. Or Hollywood. Which one? What are you asking?
Kotamrita. Now we read it in English.
Oh, you're reading the English gospel. You're Bengali,
gospel,
right?
Gospel.
You should be reading Kotamrita.
She's asking about where she
Where
can
she
get
can buy
Bengali
it.
books.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
Bangla books.
Unfortunately, you know
San
what?
Diego has
by post.
That's one thing, of course. You can order from India, but the other thing you can do is Washington, D.C. has a good stock of Bengali books. Washington, D.C.
Really?
Very good. It's one of the only centers in the U.S. which has a good stock of Bengali books. I think also Chaitanya Center in St. Louis. Hollywood, I'm embarrassed to say, our bookstore does not sell any Bengali books. In the name of, it might alienate Westerners, but my feeling is we can have Western books, obviously, and English books, but why would having some books in the original language alienate Westerners? It doesn't make sense.
Bangla Kotamrita is absolutely different reading.
It's
than
totally
that
different.
learning.
It's completely
It's
different.
so
So I disagree with this
Totally.
Hollywood policy. They have some weird reason for not just selling Bengali books, but Washington D.C. has a good stock of Bengali books in our tradition. So go there, and it's a beautiful center. It's a wonderful center.
Or order from them.
yeah.
You can order. Yeah, I bet you can order online. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
call them.
It'll probably be cheaper than getting it from India.
So it, most probably can't be found online digitally.
You can. Oh yeah, those things I think they're out of copyright at this point, so you can find
Okay.
it. Yeah, but I always like hard copies better. You can take notes,
Exactly. Yeah.
and in this day and age, I really strongly encourage people to read hard copies of books once in a while.
Yeah.
Just to sort of, it helps with focus and concentration. Yeah. Especially if you're learning Bengali, if your mother tongue's not Bengali, it really helps to have a hard copy because then you can write down the meanings of words and the margins and stuff. I have my book is full of marginalia.
Some people have asked about your books, Maharaj.
Mm.
Do you have any suggestions on how they can order it, get it, and which books, and maybe just describe
Right.
to them?
Okay, so in terms of my spiritual books, I've got two. Spiritual book is not really the right thing. They're academic books on spiritual themes. Let me put it that way. That's more accurate. And so one is on Sri Ramakrishna. It's called Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, Sri Ramakrishna and Cross-Cultural Philosophy of Religion. It's published by Oxford University Press. And it is available throughout the world. But unfortunately, it's only sold in the US and in England in hard copy, which means it's an academic book, which means it's quite expensive. So it costs, I think, about $80 or something. Now, in India, they sell the South Asian edition of the book. It's also hard copy, but just using slightly cheaper paper and whatever, at a much more reasonable cost. It's about 850 rupees, which is much cheaper. It's about $10. And so, if you're planning a trip to India, or if you know somebody who's going to India soon, or is going to come back soon
He's
from
going.
India,
He's going.
you can ask Jeff.
Boy, I put my foot in that one, didn't I?
And he's the one who asked the question. So now he's really asking for it. All right, so just who to go to. You start mentioning, just say how many copies you want, and then Jeff will bring them for you.
Yeah.
We'll get a container.
There you go. And because you can either in India, you can either get them through Amazon India online, or you can go to Kolkata, because it'll be in Kolkata Advaita Ashrama, because they also sell the book.
How about Bangalore? They don't have.
I don't think, yeah. I mean, you can get it anywhere in India through Amazon.
Right.
But if you're in Kolkata, I would suggest you get it from Advaita Ashrama. Then you get them directly. You don't have to wait.
And we're going to order some just for the center. We talked about that, having Swami Medhanandaji bring it to us. So at
His
least we'll have,
book, you are going to order
yeah,
from here?
just so we have it as a kind of you can
Yeah.
see it here and look at it before you buy it. So.
And when you go to Kolkata, buy some Bengali book.
Yeah.
Bring them from
I have to have
here.
an infinite size suitcase. I was asked to
Yeah,
bring back a harmonium too. I'm not quite sure I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the second book is on Vivekananda. It's called Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism, published last year, and it's also published by Oxford University Press. So it's also academic. And same issue there, which is that it's available even now for purchase in the US, but it's very expensive, even more expensive than the other book because it's longer. It's over 400 pages. And so it costs like $100. Whereas in India, you can get the South Asian edition through Amazon India or through Advaita Ashrama at a much cheaper cost. And so Jeff can get a few of those copies.
South Indian, it will be different language then. It's
No.
not going to be Bengali.
It's exactly the same book. It's a facsimile of the American edition.
All
It's
in-
exactly the same.
Oh, okay.
It's high quality too. I have a copy. I mean, it's very good. There's no issue with it. But it's only for sale in India. And it's technically illegal to sell it here, for instance. That's the tricky thing.
Oh, okay.
Oh, but the other thing I'll mention is that Hollywood, our own Vedanta catalog and bookstore in Hollywood, has ordered a bunch of copies of both books. And they will be selling it once they get the copies. They're on their way, like they're on the ship or wherever. And so you can order it from us too, from Hollywood. But wait a couple months. So that's the third option.
And how much are those going to be?
Those will be about $30 or something, so it's reasonable.
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Not as cheap as getting it from India, but not nearly as expensive as getting it from the US.
But by the time you have my tip on it, I mean, come on. You know,
Yeah. I'm writing a book now on karma and rebirth in Hinduism. Also academic. That'll be published by Cambridge University Press. And then I'm going to write a book on Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. It'll be the third installment in my what I call my integral Advaita trilogy. So I'm really trying to argue that Sri Ramakrishna has inaugurated a new philosophical school of Vedanta, what Swami Vivekananda called a non-sectarian sect, a non-sectarian Vedantic philosophy that harmonizes all of the traditional Vedantic schools, harmonizes all the world religions and spiritual paths, and teaches the infinitude of the divine. God is both personal and impersonal, both with and without form. And I see Sri Ramakrishna as the founder. Of course, you can find these ideas in the original scriptures. But in the course of centuries, what happened is that different sectarian commentators narrowed the teachings of the scriptures. So it took somebody like Sri Ramakrishna to recover the original harmonizing spirit of the Bhagavad Gita, of the Upanishads. This is something that Swami Vivekananda really emphasized. So Sri Ramakrishna, on my view, has inaugurated a new harmonizing, non-sectarian, very, very broad spiritual philosophy. A new school of Vedanta called Integral Advaita. Swami Vivekananda is one of the great disciples who further developed this philosophy. And Sri Aurobindo, I think, also did so. He was strongly influenced by both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. So that'll be my book, the next book after I finish my book on karma and rebirth. So stay tuned.
Since you're really the person to answer this, can you just explain a little bit to everybody who maybe knew what Vijnana means and what, because you're really the person to ask that question. What you see.
Yeah, so if you read the gospel, you'll find that Sri Ramakrishna often distinguishes two stages in spiritual experience, actually. They're both spiritual experiences, but they're different kinds of experience. Jnana and Vijnana. And he says, imagine that there's a staircase leading to a roof. He says, as one climbs the staircase, climbing the steps one by one practices neti. Not this, not this. Brahman is not this world. Brahman is not this body. Brahman is not this mind. Brahman is not this table. It's just like negative kind of spiritual practice until you reach the roof. So you renounce everything in this world until you reach the roof. The roof signifies the attainment of jnana. That person is a jnani. That person has realized his or her true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. Then he says, but that's not the summit, or at least that's not the end of spiritual experience. There's a further stage in spiritual evolution, growth, and experience, which he calls Vijnana. He says, the Vijnana is a person who, after reaching the roof, then looks back on the staircase, the same staircase that he came up on, and says, but wait a minute, the stairs are made of the same material as the roof. Bricks, lime, and brick dust. So he says the Vijnani is the one who realizes that that divine reality, which is nirguna, nirgun, meaning without attributes, impersonal, that impersonal Brahman that he realizes in the state of samadhi, is also saguna, is also the personal God, Shakti, is omnipotent, omniscient, the creator of this whole world, who manifests as everything in this world. He says the Vijnani has a much broader realization of God as both impersonal and personal, both with and without form. And the Vijnani, and then he says there's another important contrast between the Jnani's outlook on the world and the Vijnani. He says the Jnani, the person who just realizes his or her true nature as Brahman, looks upon the world as a dream, as a framework of illusion, dhokadati. But he says the Vijnani sees the world as a mansion of mirth, mojarkuti, because he sees everything as God, and God is bliss. We were talking about that in the lecture, right? He sees bliss everywhere and in everything. And he sees the world as a real manifestation of Shakti, of the divine. So he doesn't dismiss the world as unreal. So this spiritual state of Vijnana, I think, has very, very profound philosophical and spiritual implications. Philosophical because, as I said, it's the basis for a new philosophical tradition within Vedanta, which I think the world desperately needs. The world has enough sects, and what they need now is this very broad, harmonizing spiritual philosophy. And that's what I call Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta philosophy. And practically speaking, it's incredibly powerful for a day-to-day spiritual practice. One of the ways that we can see, Vijnana is a very high spiritual state. I'm not saying that we can become Vijnanis overnight. That's not the idea. But we can learn from it and try to bring in the spirit of Vijnana into our daily spiritual practice. So one way to do that, for instance, is this practice of what Sri Ramakrishna called Chipgyana Jivesh Seva, which means serve others in a spirit of worship by trying to see God in everyone. This is a very practical way of trying to practice Vijnana in your day-to-day life. Any spiritual aspirant can do this, you see. Serve others in a spirit of worship by trying to see the divine in each one of them, so that you're actually serving God and worshiping God by serving other human beings. So this is very practical, and even the U.S. now is in great need of this. There's so many issues now with homelessness and mental health issues, and so there's so many different ways we can serve others. So if we can spiritualize that service, that's a tremendous thing. That becomes a very powerful spiritual practice. Yeah.
More questions? Just about out of. We have a little more, like 4 more minutes. So one more question.
4 more minutes.
Going once. Okay. Let's see the other hand right now. All set? Okay.
Okay, thank you everyone. We'll do a closing.
Yeah, let's do a transcription.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
First, I want to thank Maharaj for being here for the whole weekend. It has been a true joy for me to be able to be with him for 3 days, or 4 days tomorrow. It's such a profound pleasure when the Swami comes in, and not only do we get a chance to see and hear and learn from them, but to see them in a day-to-day kind of action, so to speak. And it's always inspiring to me. I mean, everybody who comes, and Maharaj, you especially, for sure, just, they're all dynamic and working, and they never stop. It's amazing. And so if you just take that from somebody who sees behind the scenes there, it's really an amazing thing. And we're going to try to do more of this. I'll be in India until the middle of, or towards the end of January. So we'll have Swami Medhanandaji here in his regular visits. And then we will probably resume our visiting Swami program, should we call it, in February. And we'll try to bring in, some different viewpoints and different types of approaches and emphasis that different Swamis have. And I hope that you guys enjoy these talks. I hope you support us in this effort, because we'd like to bring more of this kind of conversation to Las Vegas. It's one thing to see it online, but I think it's quite a different one when you actually have somebody here live and you can actually feel their emotion and you know what I mean? You get a sense of them too. So if that's something that's important to you, like it is to me, help us to do that. You know, your support for us is really wonderful and great. We're so grateful. You know, we try not to be a one-man show here and share the joy of doing this together. So we did a talk at the Hindu temple, and that's been always wonderful. But I think we're going to focus on creating talks here, and you know, maybe less stressful and filled with so much, maybe 2 days of talks instead of 3, and make it a little more relaxed for the Swamis too. Okay, we do have flowers for you to put on the altar, so please feel free to, if you wish to, of course, to put any flowers you want on the altar. We did have some mess up. I did plug in my computer, but it wasn't turned on in the wall. The little switch thing was off. So I do have it now recorded, and we will post this. I'll edit out my talking here. Otherwise, we'll have this for you guys to distribute to people who didn't get a chance to see Swami's talk here today. And the other 2 that Swami did on Friday, Saturday, we also have. I'll edit those down to where it's just Swami's talks. And then I'll send them out on an email to everybody. And feel free to just distribute those around. And then after this, we're going to have some food, some prasad together. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you,
So
everyone.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you online.
Yes.